everyone, and welcome to Day 3, Panel 2 of PreDAC. This is our 4th annual one. It's a celebration of all things mining leading up to the big show, which is PDAC, taking place in just over a week and a half. On behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange, we welcome you. If you've been with us for the past 2 days, we appreciate it. Panel 2, Indigenous Perspectives on Mining. With the help of the MNP Indigenous Practices Group, they have invited representatives from nations in different provinces and territories with different types of mining located in their region, or the ones that are at different stages. Yesterday, we had a great program and great topics. Anna Sarin interviewed Kendra Johnson, President and CEO of AME. The topic was women in mining, but covered so much more. After that, we had Fred Pletcher from BLG. Fantastic, excellent panel on shareholder activism. We couldn't do this without, obviously, our issuers, but equally important on days like today, it's our sponsors, MNP. And this is, you can see their value definitely in this panel that's coming up and in the one that's preceding that as well. DSA Corporate Services, Morelli Support Services, Capital Transfer Agency, Vested.ca, and the OCI groups. We encourage you to use the chat feature on the right-hand side. Reach out to either individuals or groups, but you can't start a conversation unless you accept the request to chat. Today's session is on Indigenous, the topic of Indigenous people and how it relates to mining. I'm going to turn it over very shortly to Germaine Conacher, Partner Consulting of Indigenous Services at MNP. Without further ado, Germaine.
Thank you, Barrington, for the introduction. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today. It feels a little bit strange. I can't see the audience, so I don't really know who's all tuned in and who's watching the panel, but we do appreciate your attendance. And I'd also like to just extend my gratitude and thanks to the panelists that have joined me today. I know that, it's a really busy time of year and they are very busy folks and dealing with a lot of different things right now as well. So my gratitude and I'm sure the audience's gratitude as well for your participation today. Barrington's provided a brief introduction of me, but I think what I'd like to do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves. What I wanted to invite the panelists to kind of provide us an introduction of who they are, their community, and what their kind of experience is, what type of mining occurs within their territory. So Chief Bellerose, if you wouldn't mind starting with your introduction, please.
Yeah, thank you. Greetings to everybody. Acknowledge the territories that you're in. I'm coming to you from Treaty 4 territory today, Muskowekwan First Nation. I've been an elected chief for 16 years now, focusing on generating our own money and trying to get the foot of Indian affairs off our throats. I don't sugarcoat. I hope I'm not offending it. I just pretty plain, right? That we're in a lot of challenges. If we don't generate our own money, we're not going to meet the demands. The demands are great. The demands are just, they're getting to be so where they're unmanageable. And our relationship with the Crown is underfunded, creating more challenges. So I'm less focused on mining in my territory. Muskowekwan First Nation is more focused with mining on reserve. So we have the first ever mineral lease issued under the Indian regs, Indian mining regs in Canada. We have the third regulatory framework issued, tripartite agreement with Muskowekwan, then Brad Wall, and then Justin Trudeau. So we've created a regulatory framework to support development, it's health and safety, transportation, all of that. The 41 laws that govern mining in Saskatchewan was written into one federal law and brought into onto Muskowekwan First Nation to charge the property. So trying to attract investment, you need to have all of that in place. So that's been our focus. And then we have a partnership with BHP Billiton there in the Treaty 4 territory. That's more on a relationship agreement or opportunity agreement. The focus of On Reserve is we would collect the Crown royalty. We would control the project. So, and I'm encouraging, if there's any investors or anybody out there, you got to look at coming on reserve. In our territories, it's limited because your permit comes from the provincial government. And then after the permit comes, then it's, well, go and consult with the native people. So after all of that's done, then you show up on the reserve wondering how can we work together? By then it's too late oftentimes. So I'll just share a little snapshot of the focus that we have, and encourage everybody to keep an open mind. And when it comes to First Nation relationships, we're not looking for a handout. We're not looking for pity. We're looking for true partnerships and true investment. And it's I get tired of this line that, oh, the Indians don't know what to do with money. You know, we got to shake those very, you know, I don't know, I don't want to choose a word, but we've got to stop using that type of language that natives don't know what to do with money. Like, we got to shake all that old colonized residue off of us as First Nation people, and then the Canadian people and the Saskatchewan people. First Nations know how to handle money. We've got experts like MNP as well. We can go hire all the experts that we need to support. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Chief Bellerose. I have so many questions to follow up with you from your opening remarks, but first I'd like to ask Mr. Paul Gruner to provide an introduction as well.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everybody. You know, love the opening remarks from Chief Bellerose. Very true and very powerful. So I'm President and CEO of Det'on Show Management LP, which is the economic arm for Yellowknives Dene First Nations. And I'm calling in from our traditional territory of YKDFN, Chief Dry-Geese Territory. So in our jurisdiction here, we're actually one of the largest private employers in the territory. And actually, if you take the combined numbers of ourselves and Toledo Investment Corp, another First Nation that we work closely with, we're actually the largest private employer. And both groups are very involved in the active mining sector that we have here in Northwest Territories. So predominantly that's driven through a very active natural diamond sector. So as a result of the diamonds produced here in NWT, we're actually the third largest producer of diamonds in the world is Canada. And so it's often a very overlooked fact for what takes place here. You've seen some incredibly robust economic opportunities and Indigenous groups getting involved within that supply chain. So some of the areas that we sort of specialize in is around camp catering. So we are, I think, the second largest Indigenous camp catering company in Canada, second to Athabasca. And we've just completed another transaction on the logistics side, and we think that makes us the largest Indigenous-owned logistics company in Canada. So some pretty meaningful business that's taking place, and Det'on Show is definitely an active participant in that. We've just signed a deal to go forward on a rare earth project, and that's a very hot topic right now in Canada and quite frankly North America. So that's the Cheetah project, and we're going to be the active miners on our own land for that. And so certainly the comments that Chief Bellerose made around you know, providing the direction and the oversight on traditional lands definitely resonates with some of the initiatives that we've got taking place right now here within our traditional territory. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to today, and thank you for the introduction.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I guess one of the things I'm curious about, I think for both of you, is what would you say would be the kind of greatest impacts that the community or your nation has felt as a result of the mining projects in your territory? So maybe I'll ask that of Chief Bellerose first. And it's potash mining predominantly, Chief Bellerose?
Yeah, potash mining, and that's Treaty 4 territory. A large percent of global supply comes from here. Very little benefits to us as First Nations. The largest potential impact is employment. You know, the focus for us over the years has been to get business ready, separate business from politics. I think political leaders like to think they make the best business decisions, but it's proven that it's not. So managing how politics and business coexist, because you also need political leaders, because if the government comes down, the business people don't have that. So you need the right balance. That I'm not big on separation anymore because we've been on that journey. And then after that, it's community ready. So what can you do to get community ready? And what we've been focusing on in Muskowekwan is we need to get well, because our workforce, we have a large potential labor pool, but there's addictions, there's health, there's poverty. You're not going to take individuals like that and put them onto a large scale project, because we're setting them up to fail. So what we've been doing now is we've got the Muskowekwan Family Wellness Center that can, in order to be productive workers, you need to be healthy, you know, because right now the trend in our areas, our people are working for one paycheck and then they're gone. We don't want that one paycheck trend. We want long-term sustainable jobs, and then turn into careers. So those are some of the potential benefits. Like with BHP, they said, well, we want to train Muskowekwan people to work on Jansen site only. So I told them, well, you can take a hike, because I'm not here just to create a pipeline to BHP. I want to get our people to work anywhere. See, that's what we've got to shake industry up a bit and say, look, a First Nation person not on social assistance, well trained and employed, that's a win for all of us, not just that one project. So learning through the experience and the journey we've been on, it's the community readiness piece is the key. And then how can you get the entrepreneurial people with that entrepreneurial spirit to start looking, well, I don't have to go work for company A or B. Heck, I can create a company and go in, you see? So, but it takes time. And then, you know, I know when industry comes in, it's like, we got to get to that finish line. We got to get to construction now. So the timelines between our readiness and the proponent leaving the starting blocks to the finish line is way different. So just share a little bit of that type of knowledge, and it's not easy. And then you know, women in mining is very important. We need a gender balance. It can't only be male, because we've got a lot of young First Nation women are entering the trades now, right? So what we've got to push for on these work sites, these industry sites, is a safe place to work for all, not just a male-dominated or a certain European-dominated type of industry. We need it for all of our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and for that commentary. Paul, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you see as the kind of largest impact of the mining operations you're involved in the territory, either positive or negative, environmental, whatever comes to mind?
Yeah, I think that's it's a great question, very relevant. So I mean, if you look at the history of mineral development in the North, NWT, which I know sort of best at this point, we've had some learning opportunities, there's no doubt, right? We've got some legacy projects like the Giant Mine site, which is, falls under the Crown for cleanup, financial obligation. Those aren't wins, right? They're learning opportunities, and right now it is an economic opportunity in terms of reclamation, remediation, cleanup. But we've certainly learned from those. And over time, Giant Mine operated for 40 years or so, and we sort of evolved into what we now have as a very mature diamond mining sector. And we've seen the Indigenous groups, including Det'on Show and YKDFN, to really build up, the businesses that are required to service those mines, and in terms of that core service side. And I think that, it really resonates with me what Chief Bellerose is saying around, the creation of our own employment, right? So it's not only the ability to provide the service lines, like logistics, trucking, we do a lot of work around construction, camp catering, et cetera, but it's also the ability to conduct business. So we've spent a considerable amount of time, particularly in the last couple of years, in terms of maturing the business with all the foundational pieces for a sustainable future. So, very robust financial reporting, financial oversight, HR practices, including job creation capacity building program. We're very much metric driven. So all of these factors that we can determine, where we're seeing successes, where are the areas that we need to strengthen, the ability to test our processes, procedures. And the reason why that's important is we've been able to tie that to good revenue generation, and to now start building out companies and ventures for the future. We can't always rely on one sector or one geography. We have to have the ability to be able to manage and for our future generations that we've got good business, good employment opportunities, good capacity building, and ultimately for our kids' that they've got a future that they can look forward to. So, we've done well in developing businesses that are set for an active mining sector. We're fortunate that we have an emerging reclamation remediation economy. So when you look at NWT, probably about $2.5–3 billion worth of reclamation opportunities over the next 10–20 years. And if you look pan-territorially across the 3 territories, you can probably look at $6–8 billion. Well, right there is an opportunity for the Det'on Shows of the world and other Indigenous groups now having the understanding and capacity to conduct business that we can go and approach and really create meaningful opportunities. And it doesn't just stop there. We're now looking at scaling into other interests that are completely removed and diversified from the mining sector itself, right? And I think that's really the power that mining has brought us. Yes, there's been some learning opportunities over the years in terms of how we manage and work with these mining groups. And we've got a more robust regulatory and environmental oversight. So it hasn't always been perfect. We still have learnings as we go forward, but it really has brought us in terms of the modern age of conducting business and building opportunities that I think, whether we be in an active mining sector or not, we're going to have businesses that are at the forefront, that are creating opportunities for our beneficiaries for many years to come, and continuing to be an economic leader for the territory and for the North in general.
I'll actually frame this question back to you again, Paul. In that, in recognizing that Det'on Show is the sort of economic arm of the Yellowknife Dene First Nation, how does the nation balance? You talked about, a little bit about balancing for future generations. How does that work with the Yellowknife Dene and sort of balancing the protection of rights and environment with the economic interests and business interests in mining?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider myself to be a practitioner in what I do. So it's very much on the ground and ensuring that we've got a viable business. And we do have active engagement with the First Nation, with our political leadership, and with the community. That really falls within their camp. And then we work closely together to understand, what are the opportunities. They manage, I think, a little bit more around that environmental oversight, good, stewardship, governance. We sort of manage ensuring that we've got good, viable businesses that are profitable, sustainable, creating those good opportunities for our people. Very important for our group, and I think for any group. And I think, again, Chief Bellerose raised some really good points. We've often talked within the Indigenous business space around separation between church and state, or basically the politics and the business side. And yes, from a governance standpoint, from continuity, you want to keep that in mind and those best practices. But certainly with what you're talking about, that's where you have to have that active engagement. So where myself and my counterpart at the First Nation, Jason Snaggs, and even in my former life when I was operating in Yukon, and now the Deputy Premier for Yukon Ranch Pile, he was the Executive Director, and again, I ran the economic arm. Very important that you have those open lines of communication, good solid transparency, and making sure you're not getting offside or operating outside your boundaries. So it really is it's a balancing act. It can be a bit trickier, challenging, very much relational based. But you've got to make sure you have those open lines of communication, and in between all of that, you're getting those best practices, that good environmental oversight, that good stewardship, and at the same time building these bulletproof companies that can stand the test of time.
Thank you for that. And so I'd love to get your perspective as well, Chief Bellerose, as a elected leader of your nation. How do you balance the protection of rights and environment with some of your economic interests?
Yeah, you see, when you come on reserve, it essentially you can take away the provincial factor, which is what I think the investment community and the industry community in Canada are not understanding, is essentially the rights and the privileges on the First Nation property. So I've been promoting First Nation property rights. That's been the drum I've been beating and saying, look, we have property, we have land, we need money, we need expertise. Now, when you come on reserve, what we did is the elected council does not have that authority to secure property rights. The Muskowekwan people are the only ones with that authority. So what we did is we had an actual vote, a plebiscite. We said, here's the benefits, here's the opportunities. And Indian Affairs is involved in all, because how the property rights are secured on reserve is not through landhold interest, because you cannot use Crown land as security. You have to use it through a lease. So it's leasehold interest on reserve. But there's a series of steps to get to a 99-year lease, which then now all the banks are understanding. They're able to do large financings, right? So it's trying to simplify it. And then the problem we've had is I'm the one that's defending Indian Affairs public policy and Indian Affairs economic suites that they have. I'm saying, it's yours damn suite. You go defend it to the banks. Why am I defending it for you? You see, that's where there's a gap right now, right? And as we did this gap analysis, there's gaps in capacity. So the companies that we created are controlled by First Nation. So it's First Nation controlled companies. We're the ones who had to give up some equity to retain some capacity. So our model that we landed on is 60-40, 60% controlled by First Nation, 40% by the partner, and then they bring in the capacity, and then we sign a management agreement. Because if we go 100% owned, I can pretty well assure you that in year one we wouldn't succeed. Because we walk into these large industrial, they're at net 60 days. You invoice after 30 days, you might get paid at 60 days, likely 90 days. So our smaller companies can't carry that overhead for those X amount of days. So we've been pushing our partners, you got to bring that down for our people so we can survive. See, that's the logistics of how it's set up. They'll say, oh yeah, we want First Nation companies, but We get on site, we're failing because of those types of logistics again, right? So as I said, I don't whine or complain. I just try to help everybody understand our realities. We don't have a 30-year track record in business. We're now getting to 10 years, right? But still within that process, there's some challenges. So that's kind of where the elected headdress comes in and says, this is what we need. Business arm, you go do your business, right? So just sharing some more examples, right? But when you come on reserve, that control then resides with the nations. What it is, the focus is implementing treaty and inherent rights. But it's viewed by some as selling out the rights. I don't view it as selling out the rights. I view it as implementing rights. And those rights are set in place. Treaty number 4 is 1874, September 15th. There's education rights, health rights, all of those rights that are there. So I personally don't see it as a sellout. I see it as implementing our rights. And I honestly don't believe we're supposed to be the poorest people in this land. But through the process, we end up being in that spot oftentimes. Hope I answered you. I answer a lot of things, right? But trying to capture your basic question, right? And some of these answers, they're not easy answers. There's a lot of complexities to it, right? So
yeah, and I very much appreciate you going into some of those complexities and kind of providing the background to the questions, because I think it's really important. And I want to pick up a little bit on, you know, some of the comments you made around inherent and treaty rights. And I'm wondering, prior to this panel, there was a talk about FPIC consent in, you know, natural resource development projects or projects on Indigenous lands. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well, Chief Bellerose, and how you see, you know, consent-based processes in the future.
yeah, well, I don't see it as the duty to consult policy. Give you an example, our potash project. Why do we, trying to get going, have to consult with all 34? And then on the environment piece, until Stephen Harper signed off, our project had to do 2 environmental studies. That's helpful for everybody in the mining industry to understand, right, as to what is all made up in the process. So the consultation process, I think, needs to be countered with equity and ownership, and that equity can be, however, in various ways. But it's almost like the danger now is the tendency is to pit one First Nation against the other, because one will say, well, this is how I view our rights. The other will say, well, this is how I view our rights. And there's nobody's wrong, because everybody's history is a little different. Everybody is where they are is a little different. And I think as we proceed along, I've been pushing Saskatchewan government to engage First Nations pre-permitting, not after permittings have been issued. You got to get in there right away and say, look, here's the opportunities. I hope that helps.
It does, thank you. And Paul, I could kind of see you nodding while Chief Bellerose was making some comments. I'm wondering if you wanted to provide some commentary on that as well.
Yeah, so listen, it's very challenging for me. I mean, to talk about sort of treaty rights, et cetera. I mean, that's just, I'm very much focused on the business side. Not Indigenous person, so I really can't comment on that. Better left with Chief Bellerose. He certainly is going to have much more expertise around that. The one comment that certainly caught my eye the most out of that was around pitting Indigenous groups against each other. And, you know, I think what we've seen to a degree in the landscape here is, rightly or wrongly, through our impact benefit agreements, that you've seen Indigenous groups that ultimately become competitors against each other, right? Now, competition can be a good thing in the sense that, monopolies can be a bit challenging potentially. You've got, I think it makes groups better when they're striving to be better. But I think the risk and some of the downside that I would say observe within the business landscape is it also means that you've reduced the power influence potentially of Indigenous businesses. And what we're finding now, and Det'on shows is no stranger to this, is we're starting to forge some of those business Indigenous relationships where we're actually collaborating more so, I think, with Indigenous groups and having our own partnerships, because it allows us to have a bit more strength in numbers, reduction of risk, be able to leverage expertise that various groups may have. And you're starting to see some of this across the country as well, where even outside of traditional territories or regions, you're seeing Indigenous groups are starting to collaborate and work together. And I think that is a really powerful thing. The pooling of capital, the ability to look at various jurisdictions or geographies, I think that's going to be a real trend here going forward in the future, where not only are Indigenous businesses maturing, strengthening, able to really work within that supply chain, whether it be the resource sector or beyond, but you're going to see more of those Indigenous groups that are collaborating and working together. And that's very powerful, right? It gives a little bit more strength and leverage, I think, and greater numbers in terms of the voice. But it also allows, I think, industry and the private sector also to have a bit better understanding of where these groups are going, right? So having that collaboration and working together is a good thing. So that's the point that I took out of Chief Bellerose for sure. Definitely seen some of that, and I think that's a changing landscape for sure.
Germaine, can I have some supplement?
Please.
Yeah, so the first phase in Treaty 4 is there was zero participation. This region supplied a lot of the global potash. We were nowhere in sight. As the new players started to enter, now in our area, we have the largest miners in the world are here in Treaty 4 territory and in Saskatchewan. Prior, everybody was flying over us. We would hear planes from Toronto to Vancouver. Nobody ever stopped in Saskatchewan. So we went through that whole phase. There was zero activity, zero participation. Now it's through opportunities agreements and IBAs, and we're hearing all of those kind of agreements, right? And now the next phase, I believe, is going to be more ownership, larger participation, greater benefits, boardroom participation. So the governance right now, that's hard to get in First Nations. It's even hard to get First Nations cleared through the Toronto system for the public companies. I think that's also where First Nations are going to start going into the pubco market and starting to participate there rather than not. Obviously, private, you have more control, but in order to attract that investment and that capital, you're going to have to open that up. So just in terms of series, where is it going? I see greater participation, greater ownership structures, and greater benefits, because now it's that social license, how it used to be, it's not how it is now. That social license is way different now. Things are coming to me, right, as I'm listening to Paul and others, right, and you, like, it's just can't all come to you in 1 minute, right? There's so much here.
I wouldn't. Yeah, so I wouldn't mind just jumping in really quick if that's okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'm really enjoying Chief Bellerose's comments here, and I think I just want to add a little bit to that in terms of the trend line. My former life, I had the good fortune of having an office in Anchorage, Alaska. So working in the Yukon, I'd spend quite a bit of time in Alaska, and that's where, for me personally, I've taken some of my learnings as well around the Indigenous business space. You go to downtown Anchorage and you look at those high rises and you see the various Indigenous corporations with their names on top of those buildings. It's a real powerful image. And when you look at the state of Alaska, which is, again, a very much a resource-based type economy, whether that be both mining, energy, some forestry, fishing, et cetera, a lot of that driven by those Indigenous groups and actively participating. In last year, the 10 largest private businesses in Alaska, 9 of them were Indigenous. That's incredible. The 3 largest did over $1 billion last year. The largest doing, I think, 2.6 billion US. Nanacorp, the group that I know best, the second largest, I think they're about 1.6, 1.8 billion US. They own 35-40% of Red Dog Mine, a large prolific zinc mine operating in the state. Arctic Slope, is meaningfully involved in the energy side. Det'on out there building key infrastructure, pipelines, et cetera. So you've seen exactly what Chief Bellerose is talking about, and I sort of cast my eyes to Alaska and say, can we see this happening over the next 10, 20, 30 years in Canada? They're ahead of us. They've been at it since the 70s. So they've had the opportunity to really anchor themselves multi-generations in. They've got many of their community members are controlling and operating these corporations, these billion-dollar-plus corporations. I never remember the name of. Anyways, it was a great example of a leader that she left her community, went and did an MBA and a law degree, served 10 years on Wall Street, and came back and scaled her Dev Corp over a span of 10 years from 10 million a year to 400. I mean, just absolutely incredible growth and opportunities. But absolutely, I think that is the future. In terms of the ownership, we've seen it. It's happening right now, and I think you're going to see a greater propensity of that across Canada as well.
Thank you. I see Barrington turned on his camera. I'm wondering if he's going to tell us where we need to start wrapping up.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question of each?
Yes, of course.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess, and you both kind of set up this question really nicely in that I'd love to hear from you. So you've talked about mining that's sort of in operation or reclamation phases, so things that have been quite far along. But what advice would you give to Indigenous groups who have new projects in their territory or are just, seeing companies coming in with prospecting or surveying and things are just getting going? What advice would you share? Go Paul first, since you're still on the camera.
Sure. So I think, the advice, now again, I'm going to focus on sort of the business side and sort of setting up, for opportunities. I think Chief Bellerose can probably speak much more eloquently around, some of the more the governance side and the political. But definitely, getting in, working early with those companies, understanding the space. So I think a lot of the time for those exploration companies, there's very few that will take exploration right through to construction and operation. So a lot of those times, those properties will flip hands. We know that, right? Juniors, and then it ends up being the majors that actually develop. So educate yourself and understand, what are the prospects, what are the opportunities, and position yourself for growth, right? So again, going back to a bit of the history of Det'on Show, build that foundational stuff. Yes, we've been in business for 30 plus years, but it really has been the last 4 or 5 where we're putting a lot of that foundational. I think we could have, and many other groups, spending that time up front, where could we have been, right? We're very pleased and proud of how Det'on Show was done. But I think there's some great opportunities for those emerging Indigenous groups, particularly working with those resource companies, learn from some of the groups that have been in this a little bit longer, and you can literally leapfrog and be much further ahead in a short period of time, right? Invest the time, build that foundational stuff, do it right, and I think there's an incredibly bright future out there for those Indigenous groups.
Chief Bellerose, same question then. What advice would you give?
Yeah, for me, I think it's managing expectations. You know, when you're that junior, you're gonna sell the world. You're gonna, you know, make rain fall, and where there is no rain, you're gonna do it all. So I think I would very seriously say that as you start to choose your partner and your partners, create a good process for selecting those partners. And if you do that, put a lot of work and effort into that process, you select the right partners, it's going to create a better chance of success. Whereas if you start moving partners in and out, and you go to the table almost every year, and my efforts has been loyalty. We don't have a whole lot of partners. We've chosen them well and carefully, and essentially they've become, all of my partners have become preferred partners. And then you can start to go to those partners on different opportunities. It's the same people, the same team. The partnership can start to seek out different opportunities rather than the opportunities making us go find different partners for it. See, that's some of the things I would share that. And I mean, you got to like the people you're working with. These partnerships where you don't want to enter the same room unless both have a lawyer, those are not healthy partnerships. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the time and the opportunity.
Thank you so much, and thank you, both of you, for your insights and your participation. I know I appreciate it, and I imagine those that are listening and will view the session will as well.
Well, thank you, everyone. That was Germaine Conacher, Partner Consulting Indigenous Services at MNP, Chief Bellerose, Paul Gruner, CEO. I would love to be able to pronounce the areas that you're in, but I'm not even going to try. So not because of lack of respect, but because I know I would mangle it. The resonation that you were speaking of for the need for women in mining strikes a nice chord based on our conversations that we had yesterday with Anna Sarin and Kendra Johnson. I encourage our audience, both in attendance and listening on the replay, to explore and look for opportunities where you don't normally do. Thank you both panelists for explaining to the investing community about the balancing act that is needed between property rights and Indigenous economic interests. And Chief, you are right. You aren't supposed to be the poorest people in the land. This discussion offered a great deal of perspective. And, at the end of the day, I want to see Alaska here. That's something that, we don't think about, or that we don't realize that it can happen, and it's already happening, and it's within our grasp and our control. And again, thank you to our guests and panelists. See you soon.